Welcome to Eclat Leader Spotlight series. My first guest this year is Caspar Baert. Caspar is the Chief Financial Officer for Maxcess International Corporation. He's a friend of mine, esteemed colleague, and we are here to talk about finance and HR. Caspar and I were part of the same leadership team at a company we work for, and we became trusted friends. Can human resources and finance make a difference by working together and being aligned? Absolutely. That's my experience working with Caspar. In this conversation, we will hear Caspar talking about people as the asset that brings the highest return on investment and how it can be the wild card in mergers and acquisitions. He shares how to select talent, how to build confidence throughout your career, and how in his new role, he's more of a communicator than a financial expert. Check out his bio for more information on his background and enjoy the conversation. Hi, Caspar, how are you?
Hi, Mariana, I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, happy 2022. First of all, I wanna thank you for allowing me to put you on the spotlight this year.
Of course.
And I'm really happy that we are having this conversation. I hope the audience can capture, great messages and great stories from our shared story working together and our different expertise in finance and HR. I would like to start talking about, what we did together some years ago, working, as partners. And how we experienced the importance of collaborating at that time and how we see that collaborating between finance and HR could be so important for businesses.
Yeah, I do remember that very well, the time when we worked together. I think not only were our offices literally right next door, I think we had a lot of just sort of ongoing informal conversations, right? And I think the uniqueness about where we worked at that time, right? It was a services business, right? So really the biggest asset that we had were our people, right? And I think those were the biggest assets that were helping us get to revenue growth, getting us to profit growth, right? So I think that just puts a little bit more context around, sort of the environment that we were in. But I think regardless if it's a services business or a manufacturing business, right? It sort of all comes down to the employees, right? And how productive, how happy employees are, right? That really makes the success of a company. And if a company, the employees have the right output, right? Then my job as a CFO becomes a lot easier, right? Because then we'll automatically get the financial results too.
How do you work with HR in a way that HR can, help you do your work, like the partnership with HR?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think first and foremost, what's important as a CFO working with HR, but I think even more importantly, being a CFO is actually, do you have the ability to explain to people what the broader picture is, right? What's the financial picture, right? And I think that is one of the items that you brought up that worked very well in our collaboration, right? That sort of helped us both get smarter with regards to each other's area, right? And I think that in itself is a key where both finance and HR can help, right? If the leadership team or if the broader organization doesn't understand what the financial goals are or the parameters, right? I think that will make it already very hard for people to be, successfully making decisions, right, on an ongoing basis. So I think, having that framework out there, right, I think, fits with why you and I were talking about finance so much, right? And I think that's probably, the first, key item.
Yeah, and I think making people and money talk, right? How do we connect the needs of the business and the needs of the people so we can make this work and support the business to be successful, right? Like what is the impact of those areas being aligned versus not being aligned or even not talking to each other, right, in the business?
Sure. Yeah. I think what's happening in the world right now is very much sort of showing why in a business, HR and finance need to collaborate so actively, right? Because if you sort of break it down, right, it's hard to get cars, it's hard to get, procure products, shelves are empty, it's hard to hire people, right? So if you sort of were to break that down, I think, as a CFO, the least of my concerns right now is whether we're going to have materials in the next 6 months, because I think that's just an imbalance between supply and demand, and eventually capacity will catch up with supply or demand, and demand will, or go down, right? So I think in terms of getting raw materials, not really that's a short-term problem. That will eventually subside. I think where the bigger structural problem resides right now is more on the people side of our businesses, right? I think if you look at what happened in sort of during the time of COVID, right? Lots of people exited the labor force because they retired, and their 401ks, their pensions were all very well funded. You had this whole group of, I think, mothers who didn't have childcare, right? So they had to step out of the workforce, and you had this whole group of people who decided they wanted to switch careers or switch industries, right? So the whole available labor pool right now for companies sort of changed over the past 2 years.
We have talked several times, you and I, about how people really drive the return on investment for companies, right?
Yeah.
So how do you see we can do that better with this context that you're describing?
Yeah, I think similar to my current company, Maxcess, but many other companies, and even some of the projects you and I have worked on before, that those were more in the acquisition space. I think that's a great example of where people drive the largest ROI, because when we go into a company to do the due diligence, and we're trying to understand, is this a company that would be a great fit for us, right? From a product, market, technology perspective, I think one of the key elements is really the people aspect. Because at the end of the day, you can analyze all the other things, and obviously those are a little bit more black and white in terms of whether they are a fit or they're not a fit for the company that's looking to acquire them, right, or add them to their portfolio. I think the people are the biggest wild card, the employees. I think just to simplify it, right, if I have a piece of machinery or an asset, right, they don't care whether they're owned by company X or company Y. At the end of the day, Monday morning after the acquisition happens, right, the machine starts running and they produce machines. I think that is not the biggest question. I think it is more, how do you retain the talent in that organization, right, that has the knowledge of the technology, that has the relationship with the customers, right? I think that is the biggest wild card that we need to basically assess, and what you need to manage, especially once you have acquired a company. I think those people are the ones that eventually will drive or overdrive the return on investment, more so than assets that sit in a manufacturing plant, even though they're not important. But I think it's the people that will make an acquisition a success, right? And how do you retain them, and how do you reward them so they feel part of the new organization and want to put their best foot forward and stay with the organization longer term.
Yeah. Well, what do you think HR could do to make this process better?
Yeah, I think HR should, in many cases, lead that process, right? In terms of setting the framework for how you want to go about doing it, right? And in many cases, this can become an Excel workbook exercise or a financial exercise, right? But it's sort of tying it to what I just said about, I think, the people that make up the organization after the acquisition or after the merger or after the restructuring. Those are the people that are going to drive the return on investment. And I think HR should lead that process by setting the expectation fairly early and upfront, before you do the acquisition, before you do a restructuring, before you do a merger, around what the expectations are for selecting the right people and rewarding the right people and retaining the right people at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm listening to you, and I remember that you were always passionate about the business in general. Like, you always had an opinion and great opinion about what to do with people, and I had wonderful conversations around every people discussion for business. And it seems that today you are in a working environment where you can actually tap on all these different areas and kind of use your whole potential. And I'm thinking about that because sometimes when we think about leaders development, the companies where leaders are working in will not allow for that. Like sometimes you have to stay in your lane, and you're not allowed to have an opinion or actually have information from other functions or other operations that are concerning to your accountability. So can you talk a little bit more about your experience working on these different environments and how that shaped you as a leader?
I was fortunate that I worked for some really great companies earlier on in my career who were Fortune 300 organizations who had great talent programs and also a lot of opportunity around the world. And I think it's sort of also up to the individual to then take those opportunities, right? So, so for me personally, I bounced around the world for a number of years, which from a personal perspective, right, you could say that's a burden. From a professional and actually from a personal perspective, it was a great development opportunity. So I think especially for young professionals in the first 10 years of their career, the more they can sort of put themselves outside of their comfort zone, I think the more they're going to benefit professionally as well as personally, because they will have a different view of the world, right? And I think this sort of putting yourself out of your comfort zone, might mean starting in finance or an accounting role, but moving to product management or moving to supply chain or moving to HR just to get a different experience. I think it can also mean moving to a different country. Right? And I was fortunate enough that I had the ability to do all of those, right? So that speaks volumes to the companies that I worked for, and for me to be willing, to do that. But I think that's really, a key aspect of my career that shaped me, that makes me successful in what I can do today as a CFO, having an opinion about such a broad area of topics and having an understanding of a broad area of topics, but also being successful sort of cross-culturally and having the credibility that I've spent time in Mexico and I've spent time in India or other countries, European countries as well. I think that is probably a key aspect or cornerstone of my career and why I am where I am today.
Mm-hmm. Well, you are a very confident person, but I have a question. Like, were you always so confident, or was there something that was some things you did or learned that gave you that confidence?
Yeah. So today I am, I guess, and sort of have to be, right, in order to do a certain role. And I think probably more in my earlier childhood, I might not have been, but I think by putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, I think that builds confidence, right? And seeing yourself succeed in different environments, right, regardless of what those environments are, I think that is key to building confidence. I think on the flip side, having the great mentors, right, who sort of do help you be successful, right? So it's not drop you somewhere on the other side of the world and go figure it out, right? There's some sort of structure behind it, right? And people that look after you and that help guide you and that are there when you need them to be there. I think that helps. But I would say trying to put yourself out of your comfort zone and get such broad experiences, I think that to me is key to building confidence, right? And I think that's probably an important aspect there.
I'm curious, Caspar, to know this connection aspect that you mentioned. You've been in different countries, you work for a global company, you've been working for global companies for a long time. So what is one thing you change connection-wise, like the way you connect to people since you were younger to now, right? What was something you changed or learned, you decided to do differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more the more senior you get, or the longer you have experience, I think sort of building the personal relationships is more key. I think where earlier in your career, you're more focused also on sort of getting the job done, right? And you're and you're sort of trying to you're learning as you go along. I think right now it's a lot more also about how do you establish relationships that last over a longer period of time. Same as you and I are talking right now, right? That's a longer term relationship that developed over time. But I think especially sitting here in Chicago today, right? We have people all over the world. We have 2,200 people all over the world, right? So for me, having personal relationships with folks around the world, I think that's only more and more important, right? In order for me to be effective and actually trust and have the confidence that they have the same vision, the same values, right? The same compliance expectations. So I think that's increasingly more important. And I would say even with COVID, where our ability to actually go to other countries, right? It sort of created a whole different twist to it. Like, how do you build personal relationships when you don't have the opportunity to have dinner with someone, right? Or have a drink after a long day of meeting. So I think that's definitely more of a current challenge that we all need to sort of think through a little bit. But I think sort of building personal relationships and leveraging those, right, is really a key item.
So you mentioned that experience and seniority helps with this, right? If you had to do it all over again, would you start building relationships or focusing on that earlier in your career?
If I had, yes, I think so. I mean, I think when the interesting dilemma that you have when you're right out of school and you're driven, you're ambitious, and you're ready to take on the world is sort of the patience level, right? You'd like to move very quickly. You're very focused on checking the proverbial box, right? So you can move on to bigger and better things. And I think that is as you progress in your career, it's more about what it is that you're contributing to your role right now, right, and what you will contribute for the next couple of years. Because for me, I'm only in the first couple of years of that journey. So I would say my learning is going to be less on the finance side. It is more on the business side, on the people, the leadership side, and I think that's probably for everyone. An ongoing journey. So,
yeah. So tell me a little bit about your team here at your current company. So how are you leading them?
So I think the key to having a great team is hiring great people. So I think that, again, going back to an earlier part of our conversation around it's worthwhile making the investment up front to have the right people on your team, because that makes my job a lot easier, because I have people I can trust that are very competent and capable in doing their job. So for me, it becomes more of a conversation with them on an ongoing basis around how things are going, and sort of empowering them to do what they need to do and what they feel they need to do, right, based on sort of the higher level goals and objectives that I've said. I mean, I think a big part of my role is being a communicator. I think that topic has come up before, right? For me to set the expectations from a finance point of view for the broader organization, but also be very communicative, sort of on an ongoing basis about what's going on in our organization, right? Both from a financial perspective, but also generally from a business perspective. So I think that is really the biggest part of my role as a leader at a global level, is to make sure that my team members actually understand what's going on in our organization and what sort of what that means for them.
Thank you, Caspar. So to end our conversation today, I would like you to think about what would you advise someone that wants to have a similar career than the one you had. What would you recommend as a career path, things that they should be being exposed to or explore?
Trying to be open-minded about where the career path can take you. And I think that's probably one of the bigger pieces of advice. So I try to be open-minded about opportunities that come up, and maybe they're not exactly what you thought, right, in your mind, how you had sketched out your career path. But I think trying to look at it from what it can add to the different dimensions that you have in your portfolio of skills and experiences, right? And I think that is going to be more important in the longer run, like how many experiences you have, the cultural experiences or the different industries or different functional experiences, or is it a growth company or a mature company or a big company or a small company? I don't think it really matters in what order you sort of go through that, but I think the more diversity you can collect in terms of those experiences, I think the more fun you're going to have, and the more valuable you will be to a future employer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Caspar, for sharing your wisdom and your stories and your advices. It was nice to connect with you after a couple of years, and I wish you the best. Thank you for being with us here in the Spotlight series, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana.